I think we're going to get started because I know some people are coming in and out and whatever. Good afternoon. We get the easy session. Everyone's already eaten and tired and hours. I'm Mike Cooper with Lindermeyer Monroe, and this is Amy Grimm with Sappi Fine Papers. Lindermeyer Monroe is a paper distributor. I don't know if everyone knows the roles and how this chain works. Sappi manufactures the paper. We stock it and sell and deliver to the printers or large customers in the area. We're going to go through, and this is a lot of Amy's presentation on paper. Kind of, we'll get as involved as you guys want to get. Some slides to talk about. Feel free to ask questions as we go. If you want to get more detail or you want us to come back and do a smaller group at your place, we'll have to come out and do a Cardinal sales rep and do that. So again, if you say you want to take things away from this that you're not getting, let us know. We'll come back and do a more detailed one. If you use more, we're going to focus primarily on uncoded, but we're going to uncoded, Heather. And we're going to do a little piece on uncoded, but if you want to come back and have us do something on uncoded or talk about digital papers more or anything, we can get as detailed as you like. We'll try to answer everything we can today, but if you need us to come out and do call the person, we have to do it. Okay?
Hi, everybody. Some of you I recognize faces have been here before. We did Paper Basics back in Robert Hale at the time from Lindenmeyer and myself back in November, I think it was. We're going to touch on some of that again and then take it to one more step. So what we hope to accomplish is to help you understand the impact of the substrate that you're going to print on, whether it's coated paper or uncoated paper, and talk about some of the attributes that you need to think about, how the paper is constructed, quite frankly, where the paper is manufactured, whether it's in the U.S. or somewhere in Europe and the like. Talk about grade categories, that being the domestic versus an import. Coated paper with characteristics, there's so many, and all of them together build what your ultimate image will have a major impact on what your ultimate image will be. To include the finishes, both in coated and uncoated. And we make, Sappi only makes coated papers. So on the uncoated section, Mike will touch on that with his Mohawk samples and amazing paper mill, uncoated papers. And then hopefully tie it all together with paper, consider it a bit color, which will bring some of the things that Steve just talked about in your earlier session. And then we'll share some resources with you, which I think are in your packets. Some of the images that you'll see here up on the screen are not in your printed packets, but the information, hopefully you'll be able to capture for this will be fine with that. And as Coop said, Mike Cooper said, any questions that you have, I'll give you guys my cards. Feel free to email me or give me a call if you have other questions or you need expanded information on anything we talked about.
I think the only other point I make about the paper, when we meet with designers and end users, we're often called in and they'll have their collateral spread out on the table and they want to know why it doesn't match. Why does our blue always look different? Why does it is almost always the paper. And there's lots of variables, obviously all this pre-press things you guys went into, but the simple substrate is that important. And saying just gloss, instead of saying, no, I want McCoy, really does make a difference because it really is the canvas of what produces the job. So hopefully after you see some of this, you'll understand why that is. Especially, it's become a very international world, and Sappi's an international company. We sell their papers that are made in Europe as well as their papers that are made in Maine. So, they're very different characteristics in how papers are made depending on what part of the world they come from. So, we kind of want to make that the backdrop as we go through this.
Absolutely. And we shouldn't forget, our lovely Naomi over here is going to be the clicker stand-in if we don't have one. So if I could, just to kind of give you a quick walkthrough, has anybody here been to a paper mill, whether coated or uncoated? Was it? Okay, so you've been to the Monadnock mill, and they make uncoated papers. And oh, wait a minute, could you put more in there, and then I'm going to ask you another question.
That's like when the waiter or waitress comes. I went to Black Halter.
Okay, so it's in Springboro, Pennsylvania. That's an uncoated mill. And when you, I saw two hands.
West Waco.
West Baco, that's a coating.
The Luke, Maryland,
Yeah, which is.
changed names twice since then.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it's called now.
It is actually a new page, it was Mean, and then now it's a new page.
I should write back up 2 seconds. SAPI is South African Pulp and Paper Industries. And SAPI purchased the S.T. Warren mills in North America, in the U.S., at 15 or 18 years ago. I don't think it. So that was the S.T. Warren paper mills, and they made coated papers, and they used to have a long time ago, and uncoated, all the kind of stuff. That mill went away, but, so SAPI bought us, and then maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, maybe 10 now, we then purchased the old Potlatch, if anyone's familiar with that name, in Cloquet, Minnesota. So Potlatch had 2 mills in Minnesota, one was in Brainerd and one was in Cloquet. SAPI bought the Cloquet mill. And it is an integrated mill, so we have our own pulping operation here. So we make pulp. We use that pulp in our paper making process and we sell it globally. We have another mill in Skowhegan, Maine, where we make web products, familiar names like Somerset or Opus and Flow. And that mill also is integrated, so that's important that we also make our own pulp there, use it in our process, and also sell that. That's a huge asset for SAPI. As you know, we've had some challenging times. We've been able to really remain very competitive because we have those assets, integrated mills. We also have paper machines throughout Europe. So we are truly global. So when we talk about the differences, domestic versus import, we have, stuff back open. So back to the paper machines and paper mills. If you go to an uncoated paper mill, the base, the beginning, it's all pretty much the same. And then you get to a certain point of the paper machine, obviously your coating is applied. So we were going to do a film that I forgot to bring the video. I thought I had it, but I didn't. So if you think about a paper machines generally, we said this could be 2 to 3 football fields long, just to understand the enormity.
You saw very small, 2 paper machines are small, and that not. The Gladfelter machines are a little bit bigger. What you saw, the West Baco was small and medium machines.
So our mill in Skowhegan, Maine that I mentioned, we have 3 paper machines there. So it's just its own city, the paper mill there. And the one in Cloquet, Minnesota, we have 2 paper machines there. So just to kind of give you a visual of that. So on the paper machine, all paper machines have what's called a head box. That's where the pulp is distributed from the head box onto a wire. If you just think of a screen door, like a screen on a screen door, but it's moving. Maybe then the screen itself, of course, it's much smaller. So the pulp is being shot onto the wire. It's constantly moving, and the process throughout is to drain the water from the slush, we call it that, slurry. So as it travels, it goes into something called the press section, and that's basically big rolls squeezing that mat that's coming through to take more water out. Then it goes through that's the longest section of any paper machine, is the dryer section. So it goes through the dryer section, which it looks like these big cylinders that are pressing it and they heat. So at that stage, you can see now we're down to 5% water. Up at the press section, 65%. So the idea of take the water out of the paper as you go through. Then it goes through an area called the size press. And again, these are big rollers that this reel is traveling through. And at that size press, what's happening is if you think about painting a room, the first thing you put on the wall would be primer, right? That's kind of what's going on there. So if you're going to, even on an uncoated paper machine, they're adding to sizing additives, so they're binding together the fibers, they're sealing that surface, and then for the coated process, when we're going to paint the sheet, now with coating, there's also additives that are adhesives that bind it again to the surface. So if you've ever had an issue on press and you're running coated paper and they come in and they say we're getting pickouts and it's taking it all the way down to the fiber, if you look at it under a loop, there may be a situation where there's something wrong with those binders holding that coating to the surface. So just to kind of hopefully give you a visual. So as it goes into the coating section of the paper machine, it literally, there's a knife and there's a spray that goes across and it's spraying coating on and it's moving at a very fast pace, and there's a knife literally like taking off the excess. You've seen things where you say, oh, there's a blade streak or, not on our papers, probably not. I'm just saying. But so as you go through that, the coating is applied. Now on some paper machines, you can go to the next one. Some paper machines you have, or paper mills, at this stage of the game, you have a gigantic reel of coated paper, and then it goes off machine to a calendar stack. And what happens is, you can see that super calendaring, it's called a super calendar stack. Each one of those little circles, you can see it threading through. Each thread through is considered a nip. And the number of nips that that's thread through will determine the sheen of the paper. So if you take it to really simplify it, and if you're going to iron a garment, you have an ironing board. So you have a hard ironing board, and then you have that little the pad, and then a cover under the pad. You lay your whatever down, a tablecloth. And the hotter you have that iron, and the longer you press and the harder you press, you'll get a sheen. Kind of the same thing. So the number of nips will determine the level of sheen on the paper.
So if you go, if you think about it in terms of matte, matte may or may not even go to a nip. Sometimes it goes to maybe one, right? And then you go dull, you might go to a couple silk, and a couple more that's kind of semi-gloss, and then gloss will go all the way through if you think about it like that. And what else happens when you go through there if you think about it? So it's shining it, but it's also compressing it. So what's the bulkiest sheets? The sheets that are going through very little or just not at all. That would be a matte. Why is a matte bulkier? Or why is a matte surface also not as good? Because it's not going through this process, or just going through the beginning part of the process. So there's kind of trade-offs with things. If you want the shiniest, best looking gloss, in most instances it's not going to be as bulky as, certainly not as a matte. And if you think of it that way, so matte, dull, silk, gloss. Just how it passes.
We'll share some images on that
Yeah.
we can throw as well. At SAPI, we do inline calendaring, and it's proprietary. And I tell everybody that they won't tell me because they know that I'll tell you. So they keep the salespeople in the dark. But literally at the old, one of our mills, Westbrook Mill, when you went through for a mill tour, because it was proprietary to the SD Warren Company, you had to literally go down a flight of steps and you couldn't go by that portion of the paper machine. You're not allowed to take pictures, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, we have a process where we do inline calendaring, and to Mike's point, why that's important is by the time it's going to get to the calendar or the calendaring process, think about the temperature of the paper, we're not compressing the fibers as much as you would in an off-calendaring situation. So one of our brands, Somerset, that's very important because a lot of Somerset is high-speed, heat-set web application. So its stability on press and its strength has everything to do with those fibers not being compressed as much. So all of that said, do you have any questions? I went through that pretty quickly, but I just wanted to give you an idea as we go through this, where it all starts and why certain things, why certain attributes will have an impact.
If you want, we have a joint website that we did with IP called PaperRep, one word, paperrep.com. Some of you are probably familiar with it. There's a video paper machine from Force Brew you can watch. I think there's 6 or 8 videos on there. There's a whole bunch of other stuff on there. It's a great site. We took all IP's 150-year library and condensed it into an online tool. So people probably heard of Pocket Pal, they kind of put it out of business. Everything that was in the Pocket Pal is on there, and then some. So it's very interesting. So paperrep.com. So if you want to watch a video, and most of the videos are kept up, which is 5 to 7 minutes, I think is what all of them have been. So that's a good resource if you want to go back and watch out, or we just did a schematic on watch a video, that you can see up there.